Gamers have always had a love-hate relationship with movie game adaptations. While we love the idea of playing one of Hollywood's biggest action heroes, it's common to hate the finished result. It's because most movie games are cynical cash-ins that a lot of people know to avoid. Today we're going to be talking about the 8 and 16-bit movie games that don't suck, at least according to Nintendo Power. Join me as I count down Nintendo Power's top 10 reviewed movie games. Between The Fugitive, Free Willy, and Cliffhanger, the summer of 1993 was full of crowd-pleasing blockbusters, but no movie was bigger, tougher, and more destructive than Jurassic Park. The Steven Spielberg hit went on to make $357 million at the domestic box office and over $1 billion worldwide, making it the fourth highest grossing film of the 1990s. It was a time when people couldn't get enough of dinosaurs, and Ocean was there for Super Nintendo owners with their very own Jurassic Park game. Nintendo Power loved the top-down adventure game, raving about the impressive graphics and the gameplay elements ripped straight out of the movie. They weren't as impressed with some of the first-person interior mazes, but didn't feel like it ruined the overall experience. Most other critics agreed, with some going even further. For example, it got a perfect 5 out of 5 from GamePro. SNES Force gave it a 92%, and die-hard game fans said Jurassic Park truly takes the Super Nintendo to the limits, without the use of the Super FX chip. Believe it or not, Nintendo Power was one of the lowest scores, yet certainly high enough to secure its spot on this list. It's hard to imagine a job more stressful than negotiating the rights to the cartoon characters in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The 1988 blockbuster did the impossible. It brought some of Disney's most beloved characters into the same universe as Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, and the rest of the Looney Tunes stable. Thankfully, all this hard work paid off, as the Robert Zemeckis film became a big hit with both critics and moviegoers, and went on to become the second highest grossing movie of 1988. Topped only by Rain Man. I can't imagine anybody at LJN losing any sleep over negotiating the rights to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the video game. The Nintendo Entertainment System adaptation isn't all that interested in a universe where both Donald Duck and Daffy Duck exist, because it spends most of its time dealing with the original characters made just for the movie. This didn't seem to bother Nintendo Power, who gave it a 4 out of 5 and loved the game's sense of humor. They were one of the only outlets to review the NES version, with other magazines opting to look at the well-received Game Boy port. Based on this Nintendo Power review, perhaps they missed out. While most games on this list are based on specific movies, Compile's 1989 Godzilla Monsters of Monsters game is inspired by the Mutant Lizard's 35 years of Japanese monster films. It's kind of a best-of collection, giving us a chance to go up against Godzilla's most famous friends and enemies. It's not a very good game, but don't tell that to Nintendo Power, who gave the game a 4 out of 5 and liked the melding of genres. It's action, it's strategy, it's a battle of ferocious titans with a galaxy at stake, shouts an exasperated Nintendo Power editor. Other critics weren't nearly as impressed. In fact, I think it's safe to say that most other magazines hated Godzilla Monster of Monsters. Godzilla started with a very unique idea, but didn't fully realize its potential, begins Electronic Gaming Monthly's Jim. The side-scrolling action scenes get repetitive, with the limited number of enemies attacking. The inability of Godzilla and Mothra to turn is also annoying. Nintendo Magazine System agreed. What could have been a brilliant monster-based game of destruction and mayhem is in fact a ghastly scrolling plot-along, which suffers dreadful flicker and frustratingly awkward gameplay. Ugh. I think it's safe to say that Ridley Scott's Alien and James Cameron's Aliens are near-perfect science fiction films that have withstood the test of time. Well, I've certainly met a few people who don't care for Ripley's battle with the xenomorphs. It's rare to hear anybody actually call them worthless films. That's not the case with David Fincher's ill-fated follow-up, Alien 3. When it was released in 1992, both critics and longtime fans were disappointed in this dark and dreary sequel. But I would argue that this is not a worthless film. because it gave us an incredibly fun Alien 3 video game for the Super NES and Genesis. That's gotta be worth something. Nintendo Power gushed over the great action, excellent graphics and sound, and wide variety of missions to keep things interesting. In fact, they went as far as to call it maybe the best action adventure since Super Star Wars. Nintendo Power gave it a 4 out of 5, which ended up being one of Alien 3's lowest scores. GamePro gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. It got a 94% from Nintendo Magazine System. SNES Force awarded it a stellar 92%, and both Die Hard Game Fan and Electronic Gaming Monthly offered up 8s and 9s. Alien 3 is one of those rare times when the game is actually better than the movie. Joe Dante had no interest in making a sequel to Gremlins. After his 1984 horror film grossed more than $150 million, the director declined to continue the franchise, but Warner Brothers insisted, offering triple the budget and giving the director complete control over the final product. Eventually, Dante gave in, creating a strange, almost satirical sequel that he would later refer to as one of the more unconventional studio pictures ever. The movie bombed, bringing in just $41 million and stopping the franchise dead in its tracks. Sunsoft didn't have any of those struggles when making the Nintendo Entertainment System adaptation. This was their first stab at the license, and they didn't have any of that pressure to live up to one of the most beloved movies of the 1980s. It's just a dumb action game, and Nintendo Power was fine with that. They liked the 8-directional scrolling, great cast of characters, and the ability to turn into Super Gizmo. Nintendo Magazine System also enjoyed Gremlins too, giving the game an 87% and noting that it had decent graphics, awesome sound, and top-notch playability. EGM's Ed Semrad said Gremlins 2 takes all the best elements from Blaster Master and Fester's Quest and throws in any missing elements there may have been. The rest of his colleagues weren't as impressed. In a year when Arnold Schwarzenegger went to Mars, Demi Moore saw a ghost, and Dick Tracy had a love affair with Madonna, it was a claustrophobic submarine film that ended up leaving the biggest impact. The Hunt for Red October brought together Alec Baldwin and Sean Connery in the year's top-grossing Cold War thriller, ultimately grossing $122 million at the box office and officially kicking off the Jack Ryan franchise. Nintendo Power loved The Hunt for Red October, but only on the Game Boy. When they went to review the high-profile NES game, they gave it a 2.9 and spent the whole review complaining. But there was something about the Game Boy version that registered with the magazine, as they went on to call it the ultimate two-player battle. EGM was not as kind, with Martin Alessi concluding that the sub moved too slow and unpredictably. The rest of the EGM staff gave 5s to The Hunt for Red October. For as long as video game consoles have existed, developers have been trying their hardest to recreate the magic of Star Wars. While most early efforts failed to live up to the beloved film franchise, that didn't keep the persistent programmers from trying again. For many, Super Star Wars was the first game to live up to the promise, and critics were quick to call it one of the best games of 1992. Nintendo Power gave Super Star Wars a 4.3 out of 5, tied with Lemmings, Mickey's Magical Quest, and Out of This World as the magazine's 5th best-reviewed 16-bit game of all time. They called it a triumph for action games, loving the variety of moves and how much it lifts from the movie. They weren't alone, as the rest of the press lavished praise on Super Star Wars. Electronic Gaming Monthly called it a dream come true for Star Wars fans, while Ed Semrad said Super Star Wars is easily one of the best games of the year. It got a 93% from Nintendo Magazine System, 95% from both computers and video games and N-Force, and a perfect score from GamePro. The lowest score came from Superplay, who ended up giving Super Star Wars an 89%. When it was first released in 1991, critics bemoaned Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, the type of cookie-cutter Hollywood blockbuster that had no heart or soul. They complained that it felt rushed, carelessly slapped together to meet an all-important release date set years in advance. Audiences didn't listen, as Kevin Costner's take on the classic hero made nearly $400 million worldwide and still remains the top-grossing medieval times action film of all time. Critics may have had mixed feelings about the movie, but Nintendo Power loved Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves on the 8-bit NES. They raved about the fast gameplay and stellar graphics, suggesting that Virgin made the most out of the license. Other magazines weren't as convinced, but there did seem to be a split amongst the critics. For example, Electronic Gaming Monthly had reviews ranging from 4s all the way up to 7 and 8. It was a mixed bag, not unlike the movie it's based on. Long before anybody took to Facebook and Twitter to complain about questionable casting decisions, the geek community lost its mind at the news that Michael Keaton would be playing the part of Batman. Many wondered if Mr. Mom would be able to pull off the sophistication of Bruce Wayne and the ass-kicking of The Dark Knight. As it turns out, he could. Tim Burton's Batman grossed more than $400 million worldwide and spawned a series of successful sequels. This new take on Batman was not only a hit at the box office, but also on the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is one of the few movie-to-game adaptations that critics agree on. Nintendo Power called it a terrific new action game pack and gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It's tied with The Adventures of Bayou Billy as Nintendo Power's 6th best reviewed NES game of all time. While not as enthusiastic as Nintendo Power, most other critics agreed that Batman was a cut above the standard movie game. That said, both computers and video games and Electronic Gaming Monthly complained that the game was a bit of a letdown. EGM Steve said the game was too dark, which may capture the mood of the movie, but it does detract a bit from the overall appeal of the title. CVG complained that the game doesn't follow the plot of the movie. Not enough enemies doing the bat dance, I guess. Stars of both feature films and comedy shorts, the Three Stooges found new and creative ways to abuse each other across 5 decades. Much like Godzilla, this Nintendo Entertainment System adaptation takes inspiration from many of the most memorable moments in the Stooges' storied history. And with a score of 4.7 out of 5, this 8-bit minigame collection is one of Nintendo Power's best reviewed games of all time. No joke! The magazine was impressed by the variety of stages and abusive sense of humor. They liked that it wasn't just a typical 2D platformer, but a minigame collection with a wide assortment of activities. The rest of the gaming press wasn't as wild about the exploits of Larry, Curly, and Moe. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it tepid scores, calling it a collection of simple obstacle courses. They complained that there wasn't a lot of excitement, but at least the graphics and sound are absolutely incredible. As hard as it is to believe, the Three Stooges ties Ninja Gaiden 2: The Dark Sword of Chaos as Nintendo Power's 2nd best reviewed NES game of all time. This Activision release was only topped by Castlevania 3: Dracula's Curse, which earned a 4.8. Yeah, I'm starting to think that Nintendo Power took one too many hits to the head before reviewing the Three Stooges. Hey, thanks for watching our video. Just when you thought I was done making Nintendo Power best and worst lists, I return with a very special episode. We'll be back next week with a look at Nintendo Power's worst reviewed movie games, which ended up being an incredibly competitive list. If you dig this kind of video and want to see more, then you're in luck. I actually created a series of 14 videos looking at Nintendo Power's best and worst reviewed games year by year from 1989 up to 1995. There's some real surprises in those episodes, so I recommend you going through the entire playlist. I'm also going to be debuting a similar series that looks at Electronic Gaming Monthly, so be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, I suggest you click the subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.